This Late Night Linux Family podcast is made possible by our patrons. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can join them. Support us on Patreon for access to ad-free episodes and early releases. That's latenightlinux.com/support. Hello and welcome to episode 138 of Linux Dev Time. I'm Joe.
I'm Kevin.
And I'm Andy.
Good to talk to you both again. No Amaleth this time. He's busy with work, unfortunately, but hopefully he'll be back next time. When is the right time to make a major change to your software? What got me thinking about this was the big change in Ubuntu with the core utils and sudo moving to the Rust versions, and how they're doing that in an interim release. They found some pretty bad bugs, which I think was the point. More importantly, they fixed those bugs. And in my mind, it feels like that was the right time to make a major change in an interim release. So you two, as developers, when do you decide when the right time is?
Any answer we give here will probably depend on the project in question and the change in question. I think generally we would say that when we feel the change is at feature parity, feature complete, and we need feedback from someone outside of the development team or those that have signed up to give us kind of initial early feedback. In other words, what I'm trying to say is the sooner you can get feedback, the better in most cases.
You can't underestimate the value of getting people to try it. In terms of timing, what I'd be inclined to say is something like what Ubuntu did makes sense for them, where they've just done a stable release. Now they've got a chance to release to people who are accepting a different level of stability. So a lot of products, like our products, has like a nightly build or a multiple times a day build, in fact, that is like known to be the bleeding edge, but you're welcome to use it. So we put a lot of stuff out there, and we do it straight after we've made a release. We do a release every 2 weeks, so it's a little bit less of a massive thing. But as soon as the release has gone out, then that's our opportunity to put something out that's a little bit dodgy. We're not quite sure how it's going to work, to give it as much time as possible with that smaller set of people who are expecting that things might sometimes go wrong.
One of the hard parts, though, is like what happens when those smaller groups of people are too small?
Yeah.
How do you know if that's a representative number of people trying all the various sort of edge cases and pathways?
Absolutely. I do think like a key part of this is gradually ramping up the number of people. So something that if it doesn't fit into your regular release cycle, for us, that 2 week cycle means we can only get small bits out in that way. If we've got something that we need to really test out and we're not confident to have in everyone's hands in a couple of weeks, then we need to find a way of starting out with a small group and then gradually increasing the group of people who are trying it. Because at every stage where you increase it, you find new stuff that you just could have sworn wouldn't be there that turns out is there and needs fixing.
Well, yeah, with Ubuntu, you've got pre-releases of the interim, alphas and betas and everything, and even before that, daily images. Then you have the interim release that comes out, and quite a lot of people try it, and you suddenly find more and more edge cases and bugs and everything. And then it goes into the LTS, and then that's the kind of proper test of it. And then you've got the point one of the LTS when people get prompted to upgrade to it. And so, yeah, it's that staggered release, I suppose, effectively. But how do you attract people in the first place to help you out and try these pre-releases and betas and everything?
It's the part that a lot of developers either aren't super great at or don't necessarily enjoy. And that's like the marketing and sort of outreach type functions of just letting people know that these things are coming down the pipe and that they're eventually going to land and we need testers for them. So whether that be like blog posts or reaching out to the news aggregators or whatever it is, getting the word out there about these types of changes when they're at a stage for people to be able to test is very crucial, because there are plenty of users that will try something out. The hard part with that, though, is some users may try something out, but in sort of like a test capacity and then just go right back to the stable version that they always use, which may not be entirely representative. And it's really hard to sort of know without any kind of like telemetry or anything like that. It's hard to know if people are actually exercising the new thing and if that silence is like, it works, or if that silence is nobody's using it.
So I think the fundamental answer is the way you get people to try it is that you're releasing something that people want in some way, right? So I'm thinking about when Element released Element X, and it was just like way faster than Element and it works better. And so we sort of announced that by saying, look, there's this great thing that's faster and better. And then the immediate question is, well, why isn't that your product then? Why is this a new thing? And the answer in that case was it's missing features. But I think part of the answer that we probably missed saying is it's brand new and there are things wrong with it as well, right? So then we make a big splash, everyone goes and downloads it, and then it turns out there are problems with it. And that can come with real downsides. And if you really mess that up badly, like with, say, Java 1.0, people can be put off for the lifetime of your thing because you released something buggy and you made too big of a splash about it.
What, you mean how I still don't quite trust Pulse Audio, even though that's been superseded at this point?
There's another component, too, about whether or not you can roll back those changes. And again, this like kind of depends on what the change is, what the project is, its release schedule, all these types of things. But you want ways to roll out the new product, the new feature, whatever it is, and potentially have a way to undo that if things go exceedingly poorly or it turns out there's a lot of poor feedback. And some projects are well set up to do that, whether it be through like a beta or nightly or canary kind of release, while others may not be as poised to do that and have to make a hard decision. Do we go back to the old thing and let the new thing continue to cook? Or like how do we actually handle this type of a scenario? Not having that sort of game plan up front can be detrimental because there will be cases where the new thing just isn't ready. And signaling to customers or users like, hey, sorry, yeah, we know it's worse, but we're just going to stick with it is not always the best approach. Like sometimes it is appropriate, but like it's not always the best approach and can cause you to lose users or customers, or they just might lose faith in the way that you are running a project.
Yeah, I think one of the things that came to mind when we were talking through all of this was the main way that we release like significant changes that we're not confident of to people is through feature flags. So basically a setting in the app or possibly like hidden in the developer version of the app that the user can turn on to try something out. And that means they've then got the option when it doesn't work properly to turn it off again. And then we kind of graduate from that to something being on by default. But then if a user has a real problem, they can still turn it off again and stuff like that. So those are ways of kind of phasing this stuff through. And I did know a few people who worked for, let's say, a major financial information company who have a policy that every single change that they make ever comes with a dynamically triggerable feature flag. So they can immediately turn it off on all their customers' machines if they realize it didn't work the way they thought it was going to work.
And that's a massive thing to have to include. Like you almost have to include that from the design phases up. And it's something that would be very difficult to sort of tack on later because how you turn those things on or off and like the fact that the code still exists in some fashion in the final released artifact is a challenging thing to address.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of complexity to actually implement that with the old behavior and the new behavior both available.
Well, yeah, I remember KDE developers talking about that, how if you add new stuff but are forced to keep the older option around, then that doesn't get any love or attention.
Yeah.
And it ends up just potentially causing vulnerabilities and bugs and all the rest of it.
Yeah, it's something a lot of developers really hate dealing with. It's like keeping around the old cruft because a lot of times the changes that they want to make will also make their lives easier, whether it be like easier paths to add features or easier ways to fix bugs, minimize bugs, whatever it is. They often make these changes that are developer friendly. Sometimes they have user-facing good parts as well, but not always. And in these cases, even things like deprecation periods where a piece of code is no longer supported and it will eventually be removed, and then it's like soft removed and then hard removed. These are all ways that we can sort of like phase features in and out. But developers usually hate keeping the old stuff around, especially if it's not very used, because it inhibits their way to do the new thing. Like they have to do like the old gross way along with the new good way. Sometimes they're actually incompatible. You actually can't have the new good way until the old gross way is entirely gone. And that's a really hard thing. It makes diagnosing bugs harder, but developers just generally don't like doing that. So there's this like little bit of tension between like what's really good for the users and their experience upgrading, as well as what's good for the developers and their maintenance of the project.
Yeah, and I think, feature flags are a good idea, but they have to come with some kind of process of getting rid of them. Otherwise, they just collect into this mess that is totally unmaintainable.
And at some point, you just have to rip the Band-Aid off, right? Like we've seen with GNOME and Wayland. at some point you just have to make Xorg a thing of the past. And it's a very difficult thing to do.
It's also a scary thing to do if you are, let's say, like an open source project or a small solo developer, small team of developers, because unless you just have like the ultimate mind share on a particular thing, it's really hard to say, yep, we're going to make this change, like it or not, and move on with what they're doing, because especially in the open source world, it's really easy for people to be like, cool, I'll fork that and go back to the old way, which, depending on the size of like the mindshare that you already have, can be hard to hold on to, and a newer group could come in and take that. Now, we could say like that's better for the community if that's the way the community ultimately wants to go, but like at a human level, that's also a hard thing to be scared of or have to deal with when you are doing what you think is best for the project and a group of people disagrees and goes a different direction with stuff that you've ultimately worked on for a long time.
But yeah, there are quite a few types of change that are just fundamentally, you've just got to do one or the other. So like if you're going to switch to System D for your distro or Pulse Audio or Wayland, if you're going to replace the implementation of your system tools, I mean, I guess they could have done that one tool at a time. That might have been a nice... I'm always looking for incremental ways to do stuff so that it's not a big bang. But if you've done a rewrite from scratch, there's very little opportunity to do that.
Are you talking about the core utils there? Like maybe just change LS, see how that goes first?
Exactly. Why not? Yeah, you could.
I guess, but it feels like ultimately you need to put them all in anyway, and you're just dragging it out, aren't you, if you do it that way?
I mean, it depends on your attitude to risk. So I think they very deliberately have these off-cycle releases or non-LTS releases that are an opportunity for them to do bigger things, and they want to take a bit more risk there and make a bit more progress. But if you were like a really enterprise distro or something like that, and you wanted this change, you knew it was good for you long term, but you wanted to build confidence gradually, I think actually releasing like lower risk tools, like for example, not releasing sudo yet, but just releasing LS seems like quite a good way to build confidence.
Yeah, but then you have to do it eventually. And if you don't put it in front of people as default, you're not going to get the bug reports that you need to find the problems and fix them. Like people will run a development release in a VM or whatever, like we talked about, and it's not something they're using day to day. They might spin it up and do a few tests or whatever, and there's automated ways to do tests, but you can never really test something until you put it in front of a whole bunch of users.
This is exactly my point, right? If you find an incremental path, for example, just releasing LS and leaving everything else as it was, then you can put that into your long-term support release, right? You can get that out to all the users because you've got confidence in it because it's small enough that you're sure of it, or you've done the pre-releases and stuff that mean that you're sure of it. So if there is a smooth incremental path, it's a way of getting your code out and properly used and tested earlier, just a small bit of it, right? And it's the same with changes. If you're doing some kind of massive rewrite of your project, if you can find a way to do it in chunks and get each chunk released one by one, it's a much safer and smoother way of doing it than having a day where you've just got to make the flip.
I think in the general case, like I do agree with that. If we're talking just about the core utils, I wonder though if releasing LS in this example actually does get you closer to releasing the others. Like, does confidence in LS also build confidence in the other tools as well? And the answer I think could go either way. But I agree with like, if you can find an incremental path and work towards that, that is preferred. In Ubuntu's case, that they would probably have to address at some point, like when do they make these new releases? Like when do they swap out each core util? And if it was like, we could only do one per release or one per LTS, like obviously that would take forever.
Yeah, I don't think I'm advocating that. I think Ubuntu have done something perfectly sensible. I think it's going approximately how you would expect it to go. And it seems like it's likely to be successful to me. So I'm not objecting to that. But in general, I'm very into looking for that incremental path.
I think in large part too, though, that's because they have a lot of that infrastructure of like, they can reverse course. If a incremental release goes poorly, the LTS can still have the old thing. Or, they have ways to kind of progress through this. All these things that we're saying, like, yeah, you should probably have this stuff before being able to introduce like major changes. Like Ubuntu kind of has all of that.
Yeah.
You said it's going exactly as expected. And I mean, there have been some catastrophic bugs that have been found and fixed.
How catastrophic? I heard there was a medium severity vulnerability.
Well, crashing sudo and it giving you passwords is pretty catastrophic to me.
I'm pretty sure that was medium severity because it's like, in principle it's still in memory or something, but it's like hard to exploit? I'm not sure. Like you could, in a security tool, you rewrite from scratch, you're going to have security issues.
Yeah.
That's what I expected. Like, that's only what I expected. Maybe someone else had different expectations.
Well, no, absolutely. It's what I expected. And thankfully, it has been found and fixed before it has gone out to millions and millions and millions of users in the LTS.
Yeah. So the process is working.
Yeah.
That particular code path, I think, also relied on some like very weird settings being set, or niche settings. So like I don't think that's one where the average user would have been expected to have like an RCE in sudo as soon as they made the switch. But one of the really cool things about the way Ubuntu has done the switch is it has actually pointed out a lot of either missing tests or missing documentation in the upstream tools that has then also been provided to the upstream tools as a contribution. And some of this is just like, hey, your docs say this, the implementation says this other thing, or the docs don't go over this and the implementation is the kind of reference. Cool. Let's add that this actually is the way it needs to be. Let's add that into the documentation. Let's actually add a spec, or let's actually add the test to test these things. So a lot of really good has come out of like having a lot of people find these edge cases and find these either vulnerabilities or bugs throughout the various utilities.
The question for me is like with something like Wayland or something where there has to be a step change. When do you just force it on your users, even though you know some of them are going to suffer and it's going to be worse for them?
The Wayland one is an interesting one because the step to Wayland, some of the like security enhancements by their very nature preclude other types of things that used to work from working. And like by design, there just is not a path forward for if you did this one thing, when you upgrade to the new thing, you will not be able to do it. And that is a tricky case to one which I don't think you'll ever have the perfect time to switch over, because someone who still relies on that old thing that is no longer ever going to be supported, like they will never accept the new thing. But the question comes down to like, if you don't have the people, the resources, the time, whatever to support the old thing, then it's really like whenever you have, I would say the majority of your user base is covered by the new thing, but that sounds like super blanket and terrible. And how do you even know when it's the majority? But it's when I guess that your new design, the new thing is good enough for most people that you should just go ahead and switch over because you don't have the resources to do both things at once.
There's a part of me that thinks that Wayland everyone should have switched to Wayland like 10 years ago. And by now we would have stopped talking about it because we would have just fixed everything.
You could say the same thing with like the Python 2 to 3 transition.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if it's free and open source software that is free as in beer, then what right do I have as an end user to complain? Not much, really.
Well, there's a difference between complain as in fix this thing for me for free versus advocating for and making aware of a potential issue. Like as a developer, I enjoy when people say, hey, you broke a thing that I relied on and I wasn't tracking that. Now I'm like, oh, okay, I can add a new test to cover that. I can put that into my schedule for how to prioritize it. But like that's very different from someone saying like, hey, you just made your software terrible and I hate it now. Please fix it for me for free. Like those I think are two different levels. And unfortunately, open source sees both.
Yeah, you may not have a right to complain, but all the people producing this software want people to use it, or almost all of them do. And so just from their point of view, the view of the person producing the software, you want to do stuff that doesn't alienate your users, even if they have no right to complain.
And if they're using it, they have investment in that software and that its software's continued development. So like right to complain, like they definitely have a right to say, hey, there's something that I wish this did differently that it doesn't, or it's doing something, in my view, incorrectly. I think they definitely have, because they have a vested interest in that software.
But I, as an end user, absolutely have the right to pay someone, whether it's the original author or someone else, to maintain an older version that doesn't have the change that I don't like.
In principle, yeah. But there's a lot of people depending crucially on the stuff that they get for free. And when it changes in a way that breaks them, they effectively have no choice. They may have been foolish. Maybe they should have had the financial resources to always be able to free themselves from that. But there's a lot of people who just are not in that position.
Yeah, granted, as actual end users. But I'm thinking more about businesses, and I'm thinking about Canonical and Ubuntu. When Canonical completely gets rid of Xorg from an LTS, there will still be supported LTSs that you can use, older ones, that you can pay to use in your business.
Right. Yeah, fair enough. Yep. And it's a nice source of revenue for someone like Ubuntu to be able to charge for this thing that's really valuable that no one would do for fun.
Yeah.
It could be a good source of revenue for really anyone that wants to take on that challenge of supporting something old and keep it going, give it new life.
Well, one of the good things about open source is that you can actually influence development. And so that is potentially a good way to get people involved early on with testing of new stuff and, properly testing out alphas and betas and everything, is to get them involved, let them have some influence over how the project goes. Or is that naive?
No, you can absolutely have groups of people that are either dedicated or closer to a project that help test out some of these things, and they might have some special voting rights or something, right, where they get to say whether or not, kind of the direction of the software, or they get, whether it might be like in a forum or a GitHub or something, they get a little badge that says they're like an insider or a beta tester. Like, people do like that kind of stuff, and especially people that are invested in different types of software. They like that software. They want the software to keep going. They like being involved with it. So that is a huge thing that open source can do. And I would say actually does fairly regularly. I don't know that I would say it's common, but I have seen plenty of people that will assist with those sort of like early adopters and also get well known and be able to contribute to the future of that software or the direction of it.
Even if there's not formal voting rights or whatever, just being around that community, being around the developers and having your say necessarily means you can influence it. You might not necessarily get what you want, but you can certainly try.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think people just like to be on the inside anyway, so people just enjoy being part of the group that knows what's going on. But I think if you're in that group, you then start to learn and gain the expertise that means you are likely to have influence because you're speaking the language of the people developing the software. Even if you're not contributing directly, you now know what's in their mind and what might influence them. But also, I think we shouldn't underestimate the fact that getting the features early is also a real advantage for some people, either just because it's fun or because they need the feature for something they're doing.
I think that's actually how some of the like community manager positions have come out before, like people that are just around a project a lot. They interface with the community, they interface with the project. Eventually you get to know the project really well. And then you can kind of speak with or on behalf of the community at large or like organize that. That's super valuable to open source programs. So if there are programs out there that you care about that need this type of help, that is incredibly valuable because developers are oftentimes just kind of heads down working on code and may not always pop up to talk to the community or talk to the people around there. So like organizing that type of stuff can be very helpful. Now, of course, like talk to the developers and find out if that's useful for them or not. But that is a huge way to contribute to a program that is not just like contributing code or like the stereotypical like contribute documentation.
So we've talked about making incremental changes where possible and ultimately making the change when most of your users will be okay with that. That's not really quantifiable, but I think that's okay. I think that it has to be up to the individual projects to make that call. And that's part of the trust that you have in a project, whether that is Element, whether that's Ubuntu, whether that's another random piece of software. If you choose to use it, you are putting your trust in the developers of that software to make the right decisions. And when it comes to big changes, that's just a big decision that you trust them to make.
Yeah, and I think it's always going to be done on vibes. And I think that it's different for different communities. Different communities have different appetites for risk. And successful projects, one of the things that makes them successful is that they have a really good feel for their community and or what their appetite for risk is or how they respond to big changes.
And also like being willing to do that testing if there is any kind of a beta or alpha or canary type release, doing that and using it as a daily driver for a little bit and giving feedback to the developers, that really helps contribute to the development. And like, when is it ready? That helps answer the question for the developers. I think what we're landing on is it's really, really hard as a developer to know when it's the right time. And the more feedback you can get from people using your software that care about your software and want to use your software, the better.
And we've not even talked about when management wants you to make changes like sticking AI in, see Mozilla. Right, well, we'd better get out of here then. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Kevin.
And I've been Andy.
See you later.